Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on Across the Fence. I'm Jolie Whitney. A few weeks ago, the Across the Fence producer Keith Silva spoke with Patty Casey. She leads the tick surveillance team for the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food, and Markets.
And it's safe to say that there's more activity now because there are simply more ticks. They are expanding their territory. And we've really only been formally tracking them for a little over a decade, so we're still seeing trends. But during that time, we have seen a fairly steady northeastward movement of their territory. So we don't typically find them in the Northeast Kingdom a whole lot, but we are starting to find them on the edges of the Northeast Kingdom, and we didn't previously.
What we didn't discuss in depth with Casey was Lyme disease, an illness caused by a bacteria spread by an infected tick, usually the black-legged tick. The CDC estimates that around 500,000 people are diagnosed and treated for Lyme disease each year, which brings us to today's story. Currently, a Lyme disease vaccine is in phase 3 trials, and the Larner College of Medicine at UVM is playing a key role in testing the safety and efficacy of the vaccine. To learn more, Ben Willis spoke with Dr. Benjamin Lee, a pediatric infectious disease specialist and one of the lead researchers on the trial.
So as you mentioned, the Lyme-Rix vaccine was FDA approved and was in clinical use here in the United States back in the late 1990s, but it was voluntarily pulled from the market due to low demand. And the reasons for that, there are several reasons why that occurred. First, 24, 25 years ago, in fact, there probably was a lot less Lyme disease in the US than there is now. So it was very limited geographically where people might have been interested in it. And in addition, around that time, there were some concerns that were proven to be completely unfounded, but there was some concern and attention being paid to some folks who were trying to claim that the vaccine caused a form of arthritis as a side effect. Now those concerns were completely unfounded, and there was no data to indicate that the vaccine was responsible for that adverse effect, but there was enough discussion around the topic that even for folks who otherwise might have been considering the vaccine, that was another factor that basically reduced the demand for the vaccine.
That's so interesting.
But now, 25 years later, we're in a very different public space when it comes to public awareness and understanding of Lyme disease and the public health burden of Lyme disease. So in the past couple of decades, Lyme disease has really spread like wildfire throughout large portions of the northern US. It's also a significant public health problem in Europe and Canada as well. And so we see a lot more Lyme disease now. And with that, there's been greater recognition for some of the potential complications of Lyme disease and the need for a safe and effective vaccine.
What is the major concern around Lyme disease, and why would a vaccine be so significant?
So Lyme disease is notorious for causing a wide range of potential clinical manifestations and symptoms, some of which are very mild, but some of which can be quite severe. So it can be from something, when we see it in the early localized stage of the disease, it's just the rash. But as the disease progresses, people can have more severe symptoms, including fever, body aches, and more specific organ complications such as meningitis, inflammation of the heart, other neurologic symptoms, and ultimately a particular form of arthritis. So there are a number of potentially severe complications, and that causes a very high public health and medical burden in this country and elsewhere where Lyme disease is endemic. And unfortunately, as anybody who lives in this region can tell you, preventing tick bites or preventing ticks from crawling on you or your loved ones, especially for folks who value being outdoors in our region, it's really, really hard. And so even if you're being really diligent about trying to protect yourself from tick bites, doing all the right things, is just really hard. So having a vaccine that will provide that added layer of protection, I think will go a really long ways towards addressing the problem of Lyme disease.
We're now entering the phase 3 trial for this vaccine. What does phase 3 trial mean? What's that mean? And what's been learned, if you can share that, through the phase 1 and 2 trials?
So folks may remember some of these terms from the COVID trials that we all sort of went through recently. But the different phases of a clinical trial are designed to address specific questions related to the use of the vaccine or the medication or device that's under study. So the earliest phase is phase 1. Those are small studies that are designed to look really at mainly safety. Is this something that's safe to use in people? Phase 2 trials then are slightly larger. They also look at safety. Pretty much every study will always look at safety. But then phase 2 trials starts to get into questions such as what is the correct dose, what's the right way to use this potential product. People will start to gather data on how immunogenic the vaccine is, and potentially whether or not the vaccine provides clinical protection. But it's really the phase 3 trial, which is the largest, usually the largest trial, that's really designed to answer the question, does this vaccine work? Not necessarily does it provide a good antibody response, but does it provide clinical protection from the disease that we're studying. So as you mentioned, this current vaccine candidate is in phase 3 trial. And so what this trial hopes to show is that the vaccine is actually effective at preventing Lyme disease in patients who have received it. Now, after phase 3, there's also a phase known as a phase 4 trial. Those are trials that are conducted after a product has been licensed and approved for use. And those are oftentimes designed to provide ongoing information about safety, different ways of using the product, et cetera. But for most vaccines or new medications or devices, the phase 3 trial is really the key one that will go on to show whether or not this is something that should be approved for use and provided to the general public.
Despite vaccines being so essential to human health for the last 2 centuries, in recent years, the general public has maybe become more concerned about vaccine safety. What can you tell me about this vaccine? How do we know what's happening in these trials that might help us allay some of those concerns?
All I can really say is that, that's fundamentally the whole purpose of the various phases of the clinical trials, is to demonstrate safety at every step. These vaccines have already been through both phase 1, phase 2, and now in phase 3 trial, all of which are looking at safety signals. And thus far, there haven't been any concerning safety signals coming from this vaccine. Now, as we learned with COVID, for example, there are some safety events that are so rare that you're still not going to be able to catch those in a phase 3 trial, and that's the importance of doing sort of phase 4 trials and doing public monitoring after a vaccine is introduced and licensed and introduced, in order to pick up those very, very rare safety signals. The idea is that we will, at every step of the way, do everything we can to look for safety signals. And then proceed from there. And even after the vaccine is licensed, we don't stop looking for potential safety signals. But thus far, all of the phase 1 and phase 2 data suggests that this is a safe vaccine.
So you had to do a call for volunteers to participate in this study. What was the public response to this?
So the public response was terrific. There were many, many more people who wanted to participate than we could accommodate. And so I think one of the great things about this region is, we have a lot of folks who are very engaged and interested in furthering, public health and whatever ways that they can.
Why do you think that there is so much more public interest now in a Lyme disease vaccine?
So I think it's because now there just is so much more Lyme disease out there. So especially here, everybody knows somebody who's they've either had it themselves or know somebody who has. So just the general level of awareness in the community is just very high when a disease is so prevalent. So Vermont, even though we're a relatively small population, when we look at the incidence of this disease, so the per capita rate of infections over time, Vermont consistently ranks as one of the highest, if not the highest, incidence rate for Lyme disease in the country. So we have a lot of Lyme disease here, and I think that especially as time continues to go on, it's sort of on everybody's public level of consciousness now. here and in many other regions of the country, whereas it may not have been that case 20, 25 years ago.
Okay, so here's the big question, is when will the phase 3 trial be complete and what's next? Attached to that is when will the public be able to access this vaccine?
So the trials are scheduled to be complete by the end of 2025. They were designed to go over 2 consecutive Lyme seasons. So this is currently the first, for our group here, this is the first Lyme season, and then next summer will be the second Lyme season. And then folks will be done with the study. And so by the end of 2025, the trial should be complete. And then obviously it takes some time to perform the analyses on the results. But the goal, at least as to my current understanding, is that they're hoping that if the vaccine proves to be safe and efficacious, which most of us expect that it will, that they hope to be able to file applications for approval sometime starting in 2026. So then it will need to go through that regulatory process. So realistically, we're still looking probably a few years out before this vaccine might be available to the public. But it's been a long time coming already. So I think that that time should be here before we know it. And I do think, I mentioned the concept of Lyme seasons. It used to be that there were these very well-defined seasons where we would expect to see Lyme disease, which was when, starting in the spring into the summer and fall when it was warm out. That's because for a very long time, the winters would stay cold and the ticks would not be active. But in recent years, it does appear to be that the ticks may be active many more months out of the year than several decades ago. And so the Lyme seasons are probably just going to get ever longer and longer. And so that itself then will add to the public, the burden of disease at the public health level if the ticks are able to remain active for much longer periods of the year.
Thanks, Ben, and thanks to our crew behind the scenes here at WCAX for making our program possible. I'm Jolie Whitney. This is Across the Fence. Have a good one.